Hey everyone, welcome to our session on building your first people team. I'm Alex, one of the co-founders here at Gather. At Gather, we are building people operations workflows across the whole employee experience. We have a software tool for that. If you want to check it out, it's at teamgather.co. I am joined today by Greene and Jess Baker. And we're excited to begin this chat. So I'm going to pass it off to them, and they can give you some quick backgrounds on, their histories. And maybe Ali, do you want to kind of start it off here?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. So my name is Greene. I'm currently joining y'all from Spain, but clearly I am American. And my role to live here is really because of not only people operations, but people operations and remote work, and just being able to see that field grow and evolve and the need for it just get, crazy important over the past few years, was the mission behind me starting Remote Works, which is primarily a book I'm co-authoring with a good friend of mine and a fellow veteran remote worker who's based in Boston, but also a series of workshops and project management tools and management remote work acumen. And I started this project after many years leading a people ops team. I was the first people ops hire at DuckDuckGo, and as their head of people ops, grew that people team and built my first people team, where it was just me and another person, to all of a sudden a team that got so big we had to split it up into more specialized units of the people team, the talent acquisition team, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm really excited to be sharing my experiences here today. But even before that, I always touched the people function in some way. I just didn't realize it. So I think back to my very first work experience, besides internships, and I was working for a startup. And even though I was doing data analytics, I loved helping people get familiar with the company. I loved them feel comfortable, help onboard them, help them learn how things worked at that organization. And that was my very first taste of what it meant to be a people ops person. And so I'm excited to also talk a little bit about how you can build your people ops team, utilizing people in your organization like myself in my first job that aren't formally people, but could be in the future. And so I think back to that experience with a lot of gratitude because it helped shape my career.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ali, and thanks for joining us again. Jess, do you want to jump in a little bit with your background as well?
Sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Jess Baker. I'm a people ops advisor, and I'm also an executive coach. But I work with companies to help them design their people strategy, which includes kind of building their people teams, redesigning employee experiences, and then helping them develop new ways of working or organizing to meet their goals. But really, my prior to doing that work, the majority of my career really was spent on the business side. So I led strategy in areas like marketing and digital product for small businesses and Fortune 500 companies. But then that was really before I started realizing that people were my passion, and it was really about people and how they work that really enabled businesses to meet their goals. And so I found my way to the people side of the business through roles like chief of staff, and then leading kind of the head of people in Fortune 500 company, as well as, kind of small businesses. But I'm really excited to have this conversation because, again, as someone who comes from more of a non-traditional, kind of career path to people, I really think that that's something that we need to think more of and talk about and build more cross-functional teams, and really help other people see that there is a kind of career path to the people side, even if they've started on the business. And again, it's just a new world that we're working in, and it's just super exciting to be able to be a part of that. So I'm glad I'm here to have this conversation.
And we're super excited to have you here too. Couple of logistics just for everybody tuning in right now. You see the sidebar. We have chats going there. We've got some team members in that space, so feel free to ask any questions there. We also have a Q&A tab, and we'll be answering questions toward the end of this session. Feel free to drop in your questions at any point. You can also upvote questions that you see there, and we will try to tackle as many of those as we can. But with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. And I'd love to start. We talked actually in a webinar last month about becoming head of people. I think it starts to touch on like, what does a people department look like? And that always kind of brings up the questions of like, what is the responsibility of a people team? And I think I want to start by kicking it off of like, when you think about forming a people team and its responsibilities and like the way you're advocating to executives and leadership about that, how do you differentiate the role of the people team versus what managers should be expected to do in the long run? And how does that relationship play out? Either one of you feel free to jump in there.
Go ahead, Allie.
Okay. So I would say for this question, it's really interesting because I think it depends on a few different factors. One, I think it depends on the stage of the business, where the business is at. That, of course, will impact things like the amount of resources that you have to build out your people team in terms of, can you really, advocate for salaries and headcount behind building out your people team? If no, how can you supplement that by bringing in, external resources or supporting it from within the organization? I think there's also questions of, what is the culture of the company? Is it the type of company where there is a culture where it should be more managers are owning conversations that really implement the employee experience and are responsible for the employee experience at all levels of the organization? And if so, the people team is going to be responsible for different aspects of that, because there's going to be a need to invest in management training and have what I call like a hub and spoke model of all those different types of responsibilities. Versus, is your company culture one where you're more risk adverse and you're worried about risk mitigation? You want to have a people team that can really help you think through things like compliance, help meeting any special requests of employees. And you really want to advocate for employees to have a separate safe space to go to away from your management structure. And what does that look like? And so first and foremost, as the leader of a people team, I think your first responsibility is to work with the leadership team to come to these answers, to think about, what are our values? How do our answers to each of these questions tie back to a core value? And then if you decide that your goal is for people operations to own a lot of these initiatives, it's quite clear the team needs to be bigger from the start. Otherwise, there will be a lack of resources for your employees to have the support they need, and you won't be able to cover your bases. And so as the company scales, thinking through, okay, well, we need to hire people that are knowledgeable about things like recruiting and talent acquisition. We need to make sure that for a certain amount of employees in our organization that we have, human resource business partners to handle things like special requests, to explain benefits, to deal with any, sensitive topics or personal conflicts that might arise in the organization. You might want people to be on the ground handling things, and on the ground can be virtual as well, but things like the employee experience and making sure there's a strong onboarding in place, that there's professional development being thought of, that there's cultural events that are happening. In this scenario, my recommendation, and I'm sure we'll jump into a lot of this content later, is that you need to hire more doers. You need tactical people that can execute and own projects. On the reverse of that, if you decide like, okay, we have a quite level playing field in the organization, we want a very flat organization, we want our managers to have these skills and take initiatives, then I would recommend going with the hub and spoke model, in which case, yes, your people ops team needs to have recruiting and talent management acquisition experience. But for example, in that second scenario, you should hire a people ops person with experience creating that strategy and teaching managers how to run interviews effectively. What does a legal hiring process look like? How should managers have responsibilities to source candidates on their own? Culture management can come from things like having a culture club of people that are really excited about the company, that want stretch assignments as part of their professional development, to be able to create systems to support the organization. And onboarding, for example, again, can be done by the manager as well as like peer mentors, but you still need that people ops team to be the framework to guide these people, to coach them and to train them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer, an extensive answer there. I think one thing you touched on earlier on there is just the culture and context. And I think that's like so relevant in a lot of these situations. We work with a lot of high growth startups who have a very different dynamic in play than like a more traditional company. And I think one of the interesting metrics to look at there is like how many people ops people there are per employee across the company. And I think, sometimes when you get more traditional businesses, you have managers who have been there for 15 to 20 years. They can, really run a team with like limited help from the people ops department. But I think you also see, in the high growth context, first off, you're expanding headcount a lot, which means you have extra people needs. But then also you're often dealing with, managers who are new to the role and haven't ever been a manager before, people who are in this like very fast growing context. And that just requires an extra degree of support. So like we see oftentimes at the like very high growth stages, like people teams that it's like 20 to 30 employees for every people person, as they kind of like set the foundation and support managers and support building out all of these foundations of the long-term organization there. I'm curious, just kind of along those lines, and feel free to jump in also, Jess, if you want to touch on something in that last question. But just like, where do you think, especially about in the early days of bringing on like external consultants for the people team versus hiring internally?
Well, I think one thing I just want to mention, kind of going off the last question, is I always like to say, like, I think the investment into the people side, like growing into your people team, right? I think oftentimes we hear, whether it's in the people team or the rest of the organization, right, we have to meet certain levels of workload or complexity, right, for us to trigger a hire. And I really encourage leaders to grow into their people team, because you do need more feet on the ground, virtually, in the beginning. And whether that be to help new managers or even those you referenced that are in their roles for 15 years, oftentimes we actually spend a lot of time with them because we're trying to operate in new ways. And so they actually sometimes also need the same amount of support. So that's just one thing. Like, I think that is just grow into your people team, invest there and grow into it. And maybe that might be a strategy to think about. But I think when you're talking about whether to hire or whether to kind of go externally now, obviously I've now made the switch to being kind of in that full-time role, to being a consultant and an advisor. And I think for me, what I have noticed, right, is especially those companies who don't quite know what their strategy is yet, that it's really a valuable resource to bring someone in to help them determine what that may look like, right? And to be that catalyst to make sure that their first hire or their most critical hire in the people space is the right one. Because I think I often see people hire the wrong type of individual. And then they realize it, 6 months down the line, that they might need something different. And so again, I think it really is dependent on the situation and how far along these companies are in their strategy and how clear they are. But I do think that having a consultant in the beginning is a great catalyst to determine who you should hire first.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Allie, you want to jump in there too?
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon that because I think a lot of people think that it's an either or question. Like, do we need to hire someone full time in the beginning or get a consultant? And I think the best way to approach it is figure out if you can make it an and equation, which I think is a lot of what Jess you're talking about. Is like there's going to be certain aspects where a consultant can come in and help you figure out your strategy. And then you're going to need someone to run with that strategy. And a really great example of that is when I recently was consulting with a popular like coding school, and they had identified a few people, like one person internally that really wanted to grow into doing people operations more full time, but they needed help setting up the structure, getting the systems going, like building out the strategy from scratch. And then that person also needed help hiring their first person for their team. And so it was a great opportunity to get that person ramped up, to build the strategy, but to pay a consultant to execute on day-to-day tactics once a strategy is created is not a good, like, cost-effective way to run your business. It's not good for your business because then you're relying on external people. And anytime you have a question, you can't move as agile as you can if you're getting someone that understands that strategy in and out. They've been mentored by this external consultant, and now they can run with it. They can adapt it, make changes as the company grows. And I think it's a really cool way to go back to Jess's, your earlier point as well of like growing your people team from day one, of like letting that person learn from day one. And so I think when possible, having both from the beginning is a really great way to make sure your people ops person is getting support, because oftentimes people ops is a team of one for way too long. And I think that's really shooting that person in the foot for a successful career and does a disadvantage for the company.
That's a great point, and actually a good transition into my next question, where I kind of want to give you a little bit of a hypothetical here that we see very often, which is like, you've got a one-person people team at a, let's say, high-growth startup that is, expecting to double headcount year over year. Maybe they're at 30 to 40 people right now, just raised a new round of funding. They're, sitting in a spot where they're doing strategy right now, they're doing execution, and they're probably coordinating recruiting, maybe with some external recruiters as well, right? So they're in this spot, they're overwhelmed, they know they need to increase bandwidth on their team. What would you suggest to them as like the first hire they should be making, and how to advocate to leadership about increase in resources? Feel free to go. Yeah.
A big question. So yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think, Jess, maybe we should have some back and forth on this. I think we'll pull out different points from each other. For me, I think like my immediate instinct is to like identify specific people and want to solve a bunch of problems right from the get-go. And maybe in the audience, that's what you're hoping for, is like, oh, there's a golden ticket to answer this question. Like, oh, you should hire like X number of recruiters then for your team, or you need to hire like a benefits person, because if you're jumping to that next level, then all of a sudden there's like legal complexities you're getting into. And if you've never done it before, that's really challenging. But I don't think that's true. I think the answer, unfortunately, is like, it depends, which is like the worst answer I think you can hear. But I think it depends really on three things. One, it's the company's goal of like, who are they hiring? Why are they hiring these people? If you're going to be a high growth startup and you're tripling in size, like what's the point? What's the end goal? And are you hiring people that are also junior and are going to grow with the company? Because the type of people support you need in that scenario is going to be a little bit different than are you hiring people that are seasoned experts in their fields. They've been around the block. They're going to come in and execute from day one. So maybe they don't need as much coaching, but you're definitely going to need the more traditional HR responsibilities internally. So getting on the same page with the leadership team around like, why are we hiring these people? Who are these people? What are they going to do? Is going to answer a lot of questions around the complexity of the hires. If they're all going to be senior level people, does it make sense to go through a recruiter that has like really great network with these types of people? Are these unique hires? Are these pretty like junior level hires? And you're going to always be hiring these people. And so getting a recruiter in the door makes sense. So lots of questions to ask the leadership team there. The second thing that I think you should think about is like, you, like as the people person on the team, what are your strengths? Like, what do you not want to give up when you grow your people team? Because those are the things you want to execute on. So we talk about this difference between like strategy and tactics. Do you want to hold on to more of the tactical work, or do you want to do more of the strategic work? Because that's going to change the type of buy-in you need from the leadership team, the type of hire you want, and it correlates to that. But the third point is like, what are your personal goals? And if you can understand your personal goals, do you want to become more of a specialist in a certain area of people ops? Do you want to become more of a generalist? Finding people that can build out the people team to grow into your goals is going to be really important in that moment in time. So I think you need to answer those 3 questions for yourself before you even tactically think about like, how am I going to actually hire my people team? Which we can talk about down the line, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the same things that you said really resonate with me as well. I think one of the things that I usually recommend is, in that first hire, you mentioned what are your strengths? So similarly, one of the things, I'm not sure if any of you have ever read, there's an article by Molly Graham about giving away your Legos kind of as you grow and scale. And that's always resonated with me. It was like, okay, well, as we're growing and scaling, like what Legos do I need to start giving away to somebody else? And like being really clear about what things have to come off my plate and go to someone else. So again, using the strengths-based way, I think is great, and staying true to what your goals are. But I also think I always recommend kind of that Swiss Army knife type of an individual, because I feel like even as much as we can build a people strategy, the likelihood is what we're going to need in 3, 6, 9, 12 months is going to change and evolve. And so right out of the gate, I really recommend not hiring specialists unless there really is a clear need, like to your point, Allie, of talking with the leadership team and understanding the strategy. If there's a very clear need, yes. But I think hiring someone for some of not just skill sets, but also, how curious they are, how resourceful they are, how open to the fact that their role, when they get hired is likely going to change 3 times within the year. So I think having, a very adaptable individual, a very curious individual, and someone that the organization and, everyone in the organization can trust, right? Especially early on, you need someone that really knows what's going on, which again, I think is something we all have to work on as people, is really making sure we are attuned and we really know what's going on, and not kind of sit on the outside. So I think someone who can really kind of penetrate the organization and live within it and not on the outside is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of diving in a little bit deeper on that, Jess, I know we often see, especially at this stage, people hiring maybe like a people operations like generalist who actually comes from like a different department. And it's actually a pretty common thing that we're seeing is like, oh, this person's been with a team for 2 years. They've got some interest in the people operations space. Maybe they were in marketing, maybe they were in operations or, customer support. And it's like, well, they know the organization very well and they're interested in this. And so we see a lot of that transition. Could you talk a little bit about just what it looks like to hire somebody not from an HR background and where some advantages might be in doing that?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, this is near and dear to my heart because this was my path. But I always recommend really trying to pair, and I know, Allie, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier too, pairing those individuals together, because I really think the value that has been kind of missing in the people space is the true understanding of how work gets done. And I think by bringing individuals who have been part of the organization, or maybe the producing of, say, client value, into these areas can really shed light, in understanding that and really helping them build solutions that solve real pain points. And I think too, hiring people who have the skill sets of user experience design and product development, like all of those skill sets, that's really what I look for and recommend for people to bring into the people side, is because, those are very transferable, and especially too, they also can do this beautiful thing of tying what we're doing on the people side all the way to the client, right? And that's ultimately what we would really want. And I know that really resonates with the leaders that I work with too, right? They can very clearly see the through line. But yes, definitely, that's something that I advocate for. And also I think because the reputation of kind of historic HR, is not so great, right? And so sometimes that also bringing someone from the organization into the people side also helps accelerate some of that trust building that really has kind of been broken down over the last few years.
Absolutely. Allie, you want to add something there?
Just a thought too, for companies that can't, for whatever reason, do that on a full-time basis. One strategy that I was able to implement in my role as head of people when I was getting started was bringing in other people from the organization to contribute to projects. And so we worked in a really matrix shaped organization where we would have functional people on teams. So all the people ops people, all the designers, all the engineers. But for each company initiative that was going on, separate teams that were very temporary would form. In order to prevent people ops from getting siloed, I think that is a great opportunity. If you're not ready to bring one of those people on to be a full-time member of the people ops team, if that individual isn't sure yet, that's a really great opportunity for stretch assignments, or just for opportunities to have corporate listening and company listening activities where you have these people come on and do pieces of the people ops work for you. And so having someone who's a user experience designer help you craft your employee survey and see, maybe is there a way to do a diary study with a few employees about what their employee experience is like, and is that something that you could own? And just have it be an isolated project as a way to make sure that the people ops team also is getting the visibility that they need in the organization. It serves a dual purpose without having to commit or convince someone to kind of trade in their hat full time.
Allie, I could not double down on that more, because I think that truly is, I think, the operating model, right? And I think sometimes we try to lump everything in and you're building a team. Just because you build a team and you put people under, a particular function doesn't mean that that's how they operate, right? That's not how they get work done. And so similarly, we do cross-functional squads, so we basically say we pull people together this is the onboarding experience team. And it's inclusive of people who are on the people team and people who are not on the people team, right? And coming together. Because you're right, there's just so much value to be able to tap into that knowledge, skill set, passion, right? And also, especially when you're usually a small team, you can't do it all. So that's a great way to do it.
Awesome. Some great advice there. So, okay, we've talked a little bit about, the early stages and, the first hires you might be making, but obviously, things are going to change as you continue to grow, and, maybe you're bringing in generalists in the door and at the beginning, but, you grow and the department grows and these roles change over time. Allie, do you want to talk a little bit about just kind of how to set up your team for success as kind of these roles evolve, and then how to kind of loop leadership in and executives with what's going on there?
Yeah, definitely. So I like to follow a somewhat structured approach to this. Again, working backwards from company goals. And so starting with the company's top priorities, I think about, okay, what are the objectives that are going to impact the people team? And so if they have a company objective of launching a new product, that means they're likely going to have a mix of new people to work on that new product in order to get it to be launched. And so the clear impact and the new objectives for the people team will then be around maybe getting more people in the door, or building talent up so that they can work more efficiently to get that product out without having to hire new people. And so then there's like kind of a decision tree that happens. And from each decision tree, I go with my team and say, okay, if we cannot have the headcount or the budget to hire more people, how do we help managers train their team so that we can launch this product in time? And that will now become the People Ops initiative for the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is. And so working back from that initiative, I create a priority matrix of what are all of the projects that we think we can work on, what is the impact to the organization, and what are the specific tasks and skill sets that we need to get that done. And so that then becomes basically like your blueprint for moving forward. And from there, you can write out your current, I think job descriptions are like totally outdated by the time you've spent 1 week actually working in an organization. But at that point, it's a really good time to step back. And I talked a little bit about diary studies. I love them in lots of different contexts. And one is having each person write a renewed job description for themselves at this stage of like, okay, these are all my skill sets, but this is what I'm actually tasked with on a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis. And so if I'm doing all of this work, I can't get this work done. So the next question that I would encourage the People Ops team to talk about is, can we rearrange these tasks? Can we get rid of any of these tasks? Do we take some of these tasks to an external consultant? Ultimately, at the end of this process, you likely will get a chunk of things that you're like, a realization of, we need to hire more people for our team. And this very structured model, I find, is great buy-in for leadership because it usually gets ahead of a lot of the questions that they will ask. You've already thought through other ways to prioritize. You've tied it to a company objective. You've thought about the finances involved. And from there, it's a really great way to think about what, again, like your strengths, your interests, and where you can go from there. And I always took a different approach. For me, I liked being a people ops generalist and shied away from having certain specialties. And so I always hired for my own people team, the specialists first. And the reason for this was because I think they knew what to expect if a chunk of tasks was delegated from that to them from that priority matrix. Yes, their job could evolve over time, but if I was going to say, okay, we need to focus on this new initiative as a company, and I want to do that, and I want to help do that with other people in the organization, the easiest thing to offload could be like everything related to benefits. What's the fastest way to do that? Well, it's to get someone who's really smart, really intelligent, has the connections in the benefits world to hit the ground running and do that, because I know it's not something that is my strength nor my interest. And so when I'm thinking about the people ops team that I built out, the first people I brought in after we had our core team of just, people to think and to act was someone who is like insanely good at the strategy around talent acquisition and someone who is extremely hardworking and motivated to eat, live, and breathe benefits. And that way we had this whole chunk of priorities that could be always shifted around between the other people in the organization. And so that's my workflow that I always went with the team and the leadership to think about.
Yeah, awesome approach. Jess, do you want to jump in there? I want to add one more question to this conversation, which is like, is there ever a point, like when do you recognize that you need to hire above you as well? So like, what happens if you go through this exercise and you're like, actually this, like I need somebody that's more skilled than I am.
Yeah,
but
I think I'll
just throw that into the conversation. Jess,
I mean, that's, you answered the own question while you asked the question. Is the exercise will show like, oh, we need to do all of these activities and nobody on our team can do these activities. So we need to hire someone above us that knows how to do this stuff, or we need to bring in an external consultant, or we need stat to hire ourselves a coach and someone external who can get us to the next level to do it. And that's a conversation with the leadership team to have, is like, are you gonna pay to invest in me to get me to that next level? Do you want to hire above me and have a mentor for me so I can grow? Or should we get a consultant to come in to help with some of this work temporarily? And so exactly that comes out when you're doing this blueprint.
And the one thing I want to add to that, because I agree with obviously everything that you do, Allie, I think usually what I see is the biggest gap is really being able to communicate that to leadership so that they understand. And so one of the things I always recommend, I did it and I always recommend, is really making sure that the work you're doing, like visualize the work, right? So when you're talking about building out your objectives and what you're doing, again, I come from some product management. So like we have our sprints and we map out every kind of user story and we make it visible so that at the end of the sprint, end of the quarter, we do retrospective. So we talk about what went well, what didn't, maybe who we need to hire. But I also make sure that that is visible to not just my CEO, but the entire executive team. And quite honestly, for the companies who will kind of I want to be everyone to know, because I think that really starts to bring the work that we do, which I think a lot of people don't really understand, how long it takes, what is it, what skills that you need, and it starts to make it real. And you can have those conversations to say, where do you need to invest or why you need to go get this specialty? Because I always feel like that takes, if you don't do that work up front, it takes way longer to kind of, translate that and not have something tangible in front of them for them to understand. So that's definitely one thing I highly recommend. But I think that hiring above you too, I recommend anyone who kind of is getting into this space to really kind of, why you're doing it, or to put your ego aside and really like what is in the best interest of the clients, the employees, all of those things, and really kind of sitting back and saying like, you might not need me, or you might need someone, or you might need someone above me in order to give you what you need. And I think just going into these types of roles, eyes wide open, that may happen, and being okay with that.
Awesome. Okay, so one last question before we jump into Q&A here. We've got some questions coming in, and this is for you, Jess. Curious, and this is obviously near and dear to our heart. How do you think about like people operations software and versus like hiring people? Because I think something that we see and obviously like how we position ourselves is, we do see a lot of teams that bring in a lot of coordinators in the long run, and you end up with a bunch of people doing manual work, and it's like, well, maybe if we put the right tooling right around our base team, we wouldn't have had to hire so many people, and we could have one or two people doing that work instead of 3 to 5 people, right? As we get like that size of like 250 or 300 people. How do you think about like weighing the tooling versus hiring actual people?
Yeah. I really push this kind of concept of like enablement, right? Like our job is to ultimately enable the organization to operate without us being in the room. Like that's like the end goal. But I do think people need to realize that you can't just bolt on software or bolt on, any sort of technology solution if you don't have the right people in the room to design the experience, map out the process, train any of the kind of like actors or, the people in the process, and then also to manage the software or the technology solution after it is implemented, right? Because again, things evolve, change. We should be learning about what's working and what's not, and then implementing those solutions into the tool. But I think like one of the biggest things is that you don't need to necessarily, have it, bring all these people in and make it perfect before you implement the tooling. I think you just needed to get it to a point in which it truly is the enabler of the people team and the organization. And I think it's extremely critical that you start having these conversations early with your leadership team, because again, they are not necessarily, most are not used to some of the value and enablement that can happen out of a tool coming from a tool and not an individual, right? So you're also changing a little bit of behavior. And that's also why I think individuals are extremely important. And where, again, their role changes, right? In the beginning, they're probably manually doing these processes or experiences to test out kind of what the ideal solution would be. And then they slowly start pulling themselves out of doing that work and then start moving to other value add type things for the organization. But again, I'm a huge fan of that relationship between people and software, and you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. I'd love to jump into some Q&A from here. So we'll start it off with a question from Amanda at Figma. How do you know when you reach the inflection point of needing to build out functional swim lanes within the people ops function? Opinions on which one takes priority? Give you a second to think over that.
I love this question because it was a big mistake I made in building out my first people team. I thought that I could do it by myself for a lot longer than I could have. And I remember having conversations with the CEO, and, I was the first people ops hire. It was a startup. I was young in my career. I felt like I had a lot to prove, and I wanted to, really make a name for myself. And I think that I was so determined to do a good job that I forgot that part of doing a good job is knowing when to ask for help. And in hindsight, I wish I asked for help in the form of hiring someone full-time to be part of my team a lot earlier on. And so I think the lesson that I learned there is that it's not always external signals of the business. Sometimes it's just having more self-awareness and more vulnerability to know that you are struggling. That you're, having moments where you're feeling burnt out, where you're having moments where you're feeling overloaded with the work. And yes, you can do it all, but you're not giving yourself enough time to think and be creative and innovate. When you're spending too much time putting out fires or dealing with employee issues and tactics and not enough time dealing with strategies, those are all red flags that the inflection point has likely already happened from my experience, at least, and that it's time to start building out your people team and then make the functional swim lanes if you want or not. You can always continue to grow a team of generalists. I think the inflection point for really the functional expertise, at least in the US, is the turning point of 50 US employees. For me, that was a really scary number because I was like, now there's a lot of compliance things that I'm not ready to do alone. And I want people that have navigated the next stage of growth from 50 people to 100 people, 100 people to 200 people, 200 people to 1,000 people. Like, what does that look like? And so for me, because I didn't have the compliance experience at the very beginning, that was another personal inflection point. So I think my answer to this question is all deeply personal. because that was the lesson that I learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in here now. So let's go into quick mode and see how many we can get through. So we'll do just like either of you feel free to jump in if you feel like you've got experience here. So from Cindy, do you think people ops leaders should get their own coaches for growth and mentorship, especially less experienced people leaders, teams of one who report directly to CEOs who don't often have HR people ops experience? I feel like either of you could talk to that pretty well.
I'm sure we both would say yes, absolutely. Which honestly is why, one of the reasons why I did it, especially whether you are the only people ops individual or you're a people ops leader, it can be lonely. It's very similar to the role of the CEO, where you feel like sometimes you don't have anyone to talk to, right? And so both from, I think, a support, but also experience, right? Sometimes you just need someone else to give you a different perspective, to challenge your thinking in a safe space. And so that's why I love what I do, because I can create that safe space. But again, I just think that this area of the business is growing and changing so quickly. You can't expect any one person to know everything, or even if they have 20 years of experience in HR, we are living in a completely different world now. So yeah, obviously, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
Best investment.
All right, from Thomas. I've seen other companies advocate for hiring people partners who come from the department they partner with. Example, an ex-engineer as people partner for engineering. What are your thoughts on that? Either of you have experience at that kind of stage?
So I would say I don't have experience in purposely hiring someone from that department to be the people partner. The only, I guess, perspective I can add to this is that something to think about. Yes, there would be that relationship, but sometimes it also comes with baggage. And they understand, again, there's value in understanding how things get done, but there's also some of that bias that they bring to it. And I'm also a huge advocate of cross-pollinating organizations. So I think it would be extremely valuable if you are an engineer. I would love for you to be the people partner for the design team, or some other part of the organization that there can be value in kind of sharing experience, knowledge, and trust.
Awesome. All right. From our own Emily, here, our chief of staff, who also leads our own people ops function. How do you reward and incentivize non-people ops teammates for taking on stretch assignments that help the people team? So like running a culture club, helping design an onboarding survey.
I love this. There's two ways I've done it in the past. The first way is there are people that genuinely enjoy it and they don't want to do it full time, but they want to do it and it makes them feel connected to their coworkers. So creating the space and the time as part of work, not encouraging them to spend extra work hours doing it, is a really great way to build the culture and to get other people involved. So the way that can happen is having special blocked time throughout a quarter where people can have opportunities to participate in different areas of the business that they're interested in. It can be similar to hack days, but not engineering focused, where people can do any sort of different functional job that they want, or having employee interest groups where there's dedicated time to do meetings during the work schedule, and having a culture club be part of that. So I think that's one answer. The second answer is focusing on how it can help them with their career goals. In terms of professional development, there's a lot to learn from a people team in terms of the type of leadership initiatives, interpersonal skills, empathy, leadership, and emotional intelligence. I don't need to say the whole list of things because you're all people ops people, so you know like what great skill sets come from this type of work. And all of those skill sets are immensely like useful for people in their career to become managers. And so if people actively want to become people managers in their functional skill set, working on people projects as stretch assignments is a route to help them get there faster. And so that's one way to reward or incentivize people in terms of helping them climb their career ladder within their functional area.
Awesome. All right, we've got 3 questions left. I think we can get through it here. All right, from Lucia, any thoughts on how you ensure you are designing your people experience and people team with DE, I, and B in mind? Any learnings from your experience to pass along, context of being a 20-person company doubling next year with minimal diversity right now?
I love that question. Figure out why of the people there, like what is the type of diversity that you have and what is holding them back. Bring people from diverse perspectives that are outside of the organization and ask them questions about what's missing from your organization and why they, wouldn't want a seat or feel comfortable having a seat there. Like only people representative of those groups can really speak for those groups. So it's, even for me, not a good answer to pretend that I know otherwise, and lean on people to help you.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think, again, this goes back to just being able to, you don't have to be an expert at everything. If you recognize something might be, an area of opportunity, like reaching out to find the resources for that.
All right. Another one from Cindy here. How do you start anticipating what work will need to be done as the company grows, especially a fast-growing company, when you haven't done it before?
I mean, I think, again, this goes back to, you can create plans and roadmaps, but you need to be able to be regularly syncing with the leadership team and adjusting those plans, right? And taking cues from them and where the business is going and adjusting your strategy kind of as you go. So again, a lot of times you don't, whatever plan you have is not going to be the plan you're executing in 12 months. But I think just being really aware, have your ear to the ground, and staying connected with the business is your best bet for iterating on that plan as you go. And I think the other piece, though, is making sure that everyone knows that that's what you're doing. Because again, sometimes people don't realize that your plans, just like their, product launch plans, are in constant iteration. And so that's something too that I highly recommend, making sure that everyone knows that.
Lastly, we've got a tactical question here, just in terms of actually like planning for recruiting. In a company with a flat hierarchy, how effective is it to have hiring managers take on sourcing phone screens versus hiring recruiters to take on that work? And I think that can be applied maybe even to some broader situations here.
This is actually something I did last year. We were really trying to get hiring managers to take a more active role in the process and the experience. This is actually where tooling, right? Software comes into play, right? You can create and design the experience you want, and then train individuals on the experience, and then allow them some freedom within a framework. And then I also, just one thing, a lot of times people talk about hiring recruiters, but I think being really specific, like, what are you hiring them for, right? Sometimes, we were really specific. We wanted someone to source, but we didn't need them to do anything beyond that, right? We really wanted the hiring managers to be, in part of that process, right? Or part of that experience right from the beginning. And so I think just also being really clear, like, are you expecting them to go out and source? Are you expecting them to do phone screens? Are you expecting them to do interviews? Are you expecting them to do evaluations? Whatever that may be. I think just being really specific, because there's so much involved in that experience and process.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I know we're up on time here. We'll kind of close this down. Really appreciate the time. We'll be hanging out in the networking session right after this. We have some team members there, but I encourage everybody that's still tuned in. Would love to have you as kind of part of our community. We do webinars like this monthly. We have a weekly newsletter, and you can find out more information about all of that on our website at teamgather.co. So I'll drop that into the chat. But thank you for joining us, and hope to see you next time. Thanks everybody.
So much for having us, and everybody for joining, and hope to see you all soon at an event like this or on LinkedIn. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.